Hi, everyone. I'm here with Swami Sarvapriyananda. He serves as the minister and spiritual leader of Vedanta Society of New York. Hello, Swami. Welcome, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Soma.
Today, I feel like I wanted to more focus on questions related to after self-realization, mostly because I think when it comes to self-realization or an awakening, it seems like most people seem to point to the same notion of how everything is projection of mind and how mind divides itself into subjects and objects. And the goal of the Vedas, it seems to go beyond this subject-object division. But it seems like what I've noticed, there seems to be, although a lot of people describe this in many different ways in their own expressions, most of the differences seem to arise in what happens after self-realization. And one main difference I wanted to point out was there's this one common perspective that once you see through all the false projections that are concealing our real nature, that is considered to be the ultimate realization, and anything after that is considered to indulge more in delusional ideas. And there's this second perspective of Vedantist that is like discovering that it is unreal. It's just the first step. It's just like discovering that the magic is unreal, but the magician is real. And that pursuit of trying to find what is real is kind of like an ongoing thing. So which one do you resonate with?
A direct answer would be the second one, what you call the Vedantic perspective. I would definitely resonate with that. But before I go into that, just make a point here. What you have said so far is perfectly all right. But we must also recognize this is within the framework which we are talking about, and it is my framework also. It is the framework of Advaita Vedanta, for example. It would be true to some extent of the Sankhya philosophy, of multiple schools of Buddhism, in say Tibetan Buddhism, for example, some schools of Zen traditions. But we must also recognize there are entirely different traditions. For example, the dualistic, theistic, devotional traditions, certain mystical traditions where it wouldn't be so much self-realization, it wouldn't be so as much as God realization or mystical experience of God, or just attaining to bhakti or devotion and surrender to God. Those are wonderful traditions too. I mean, I know we are not going to really talk about those right now, but I just wanted to make this distinction that there are other traditions of mysticism, spirituality, which are wonderful, but which are dualistic rather than non-dualistic, which are God-oriented rather than self-realization oriented. Now, back to the question which you asked was, there is one stream of thought, especially in the direct path approaches, where you have this moment of awakening and you see through it, and the whole universe, including this body and its personal life, is reduced to the status of an appearance. Now, what happens is in an appearance, good or bad afterwards, it's still an appearance. So the argument goes that it really doesn't matter after that. This is slightly problematic because the way to respond to it would be to go back to what were you trying to do in the first place. When you're chasing self-realization, enlightenment, the goal generally is stated as overcoming suffering and attainment of peace, of fulfillment, let us say. In Sanskrit, dukkha nivritti ananda prapti. Now, it's good to apply this test to oneself. So once I've seen through the the network of delusion, and I realize I am this unlimited absolute, and this world is an appearance, including this body, including this mind also. After that, the language which you use, for example, everything is just delusional, generating ideas. Is this good or bad? Should I do this or do that? All those are part of the world of ideation. True. But a good check is, are my own problems solved? What I set out to do? Have I overcome suffering, at least on this so-called delusional personal level? If I say, no, even that suffering is a delusion, I might say it, but has it solved my problem? Am I still miserable after that? Am I still generating misery around me after that? It's a good check. The second test would be, in these traditions, definitely in Advaita Vedanta, is the traditions of the teachers, of the spiritual teachers throughout the ages. One good way is to look back at their lives. Did they become totally unconcerned with the world of appearance and like sat like a rock, doesn't matter what happened? In most cases, you see that was not so. They were often people of great engagement in life. They were people of great joy. They inspired many people. Even if they did not have wide circles of influence, they at least had lives which were obviously deeply fulfilled lives. So let me put it this way. What is the nature of our existence after enlightenment? One of our Swami Gambhiranji, in one essay, he has talked about three kinds of liberated while living. The term we used for enlightened or after enlightenment would be Jivan Mukti, liberated while living. So this individual body is continuing, this individual life continues, and yet the person who was there is now a liberated person, enlightened person. Now, I'm going to be a little careless with terms, because I've noticed once you start talking about enlightenment and post-enlightenment, if you're going to be too picky about words, you don't get anywhere at all. So I'm just going to talk the way people normally talk. So the three types of enlightened and living while enlightened, Jivan Mukta, would be the one who is totally unconcerned with the world. So remains in samadhi, oblivious to the world outside. The second would be the person who is aware of the world, but looks upon it, like you said, like a magic show, like a network of delusion. Sri Ramakrishna himself talks about like this crazy person, was an enlightened person who came to Dakshineshwar, the temple of Kali, when he was there. And he would sit and meditate all day long. Once in a while, this man would come out of the hut and look around at the temple and the garden and the river that's on the bank of the Ganga, what's called the Hooghly there. And he would burst out, in the Indian expression of, wow, wow, wonderful, what a wonder, what a wonder, what a delight this display is. It's like a magic display. It shouldn't be there. It's one limitless absolute. And yet it's a world, it's buildings, it's people, it's rivers and sky and joy and sorrow. What a display, what a magic show. And then he would go back to his hut and start meditating again. That's the second kind, who treats this universe as a wondrous appearance. And there's a third kind, whose heart melts with love at the suffering of fellow sentient beings, out of compassion. And this enlightened being sets out to help others. So by maybe giving the teaching or leading others, trying to lead others to the same enlightenment which he has attained. In this category falls all the great teachers of spiritual masters of humanity. They lived after enlightenment, they lived lives of compassion and service. So all three are possible.
Another conflicting idea I have come across while discussing this topic is, it seems like it is possible to be self-realized, even though the quality of authenticity or quality of awareness is still low. But it seems like if you're on this path, it's inevitable that the awareness level will keep on improving, but it gets dismissed by some Advaita philosophy that it can be explained off that those things are not necessary? And what do you have to say about that? Do you think qualities like awareness will eventually develop as
Right. That's a good question, actually. And it's an important, there's a whole book which deals about it. And there may be more than one, but I know of one book which is pretty popular, which deals in detail with this question. It's called Jivan Mukti Viveka. Can I show you the book? It's right on my shelf.
Of course.
So this is the book. It was written about 600 years ago by a great Advaita master from the south of India, in what was called the Vijayanagar kingdom. It's partly in Andhra Pradesh, partly in Karnataka. So Vidyaranya Swami, he wrote this book. It's called Jivan Mukti Viveka, an analysis of what happens, or discernment or investigation into what happens after enlightenment. So the very theme of of today's interview. So there's this whole book about it, several chapters, hundreds of verses discussing this topic. Now the question is, what happens after enlightenment? What is expected? What should happen? Let's analyze this enlightenment phenomenon into two aspects. One is what I would like to call the paradigm shift model of enlightenment. And the other is what I would like to call the ethical manifestation model of enlightenment. Again, these are not my words. These are actually a professor who wrote a paper on this, actually. So the paradigm shift model of enlightenment is, after enlightenment, I realize, oh, I am not this little body with some amount of awareness or consciousness. I am actually consciousness with a body mind, in which a body mind appears, in which the entire universe appears. Like the whole universe appears in a dream, in my dreaming mind. Similarly, in consciousness, mind, body, universe, they all appear, interact, play around, and disappear. And all the time, they are appearances. They are not separate realities out there. They are not realities apart from consciousness. So this is a paradigm shift. It's a huge, huge paradigm shift from a pluralistic universe of matter, energy, time, space, living, non-living, human, non-human, this kind of universe, to all of this is there. What I just described, the pluralistic universe is there, but underlying it is one limitless absolute being, which is of the nature of existence, consciousness. This is called a paradigm shift. From I am a little person to I am pure consciousness. This is a paradigm shift. But this is not all of enlightenment. There is the second aspect of enlightenment, is that am I able to manifest the qualities of a Buddha? I have the vision of the Buddha now, but am I able to manifest the qualities of a Buddha? This person, I know I am not this person, but this person is still living, and others would consider this person to be enlightened. Now this enlightened being, does it continue to be the same old Sarvapriyananda? Happy when people praise him, irritable when things do not go his way, afraid of pain, looking for pleasure, or the old person, does that continue unimpeded? In that case, this enlightenment is a little bit iffy, suspicious. Or is he able to manifest the qualities of a Buddha? Is there selflessness? Is there unconditional altruism? Is there perfect control over the mind and the senses? Is there love? Is there fearlessness? Is there a deep sense of oneness with all living beings? Is there unlimited concern for others? So this is called ethical manifestation. The qualities which every civilization, every religion, every mystical tradition has associated with enlightened beings. There are certain qualities. We cannot deny that in our traditions, they have all been associated with enlightenment. So are they being manifested in our lives? So the answer to your question is, in Advaita Vedanta, both of these are very important. Yes, one must come to the realization, I am Brahman, I am pure consciousness. That is enlightenment, clearly. At the same time, the ethics at their best, at their highest, should manifest in our lives. That's why Swami Vivekananda defined religion. He defined religion itself as the manifestation of the divinity which is already within us. So the divinity already within us is that we are not the body mind, we are this absolute immortal consciousness, absolute being. I realize that. That's first step. But then he says manifestation. Manifestation must now be reflected in the life of this person. He goes on to say, my mission in life can be put in a few words. It is to preach unto humanity their inner divinity and how to make it manifest in every movement of life. What is every movement of life? The things that we do, how we behave with others, things that we say, things that we think. Our thinking must be different. It must be expressed in an enlightened speech and in enlightened action. That's an important test. That is what makes this enlightened person a blessing to everyone around him or her, and also is a very good internal test. So I always feel we should not be in a hurry to claim enlightenment, in a hurry to move on to post-enlightenment life. Rather, it's much better, even if you are enlightened, if you're conservative and you claim that, no, I'm still on the way, I'm trying, I'm seeking, that's much better than suppose I turn up and I say, I'm not really enlightened, but I immediately claim enlightenment and go on a lecture tour. That is not such a good idea. And this was recognized in India for centuries. See, this book I pointed out is 600 years old, and it's quoting other texts which are 1,000, 1,500 years old, Upanishads which are 3,000, 4,000 years old. So it was kind of the project of the Indian mind. You might call it the Enlightenment project. So these problems they have encountered for centuries, if not millennia. They have worked out responses to these. One more point. The Enlightenment itself may be an instantaneous breakthrough, often is, or a series of instantaneous breakthroughs, very clear moments of seeing, where you can never forget this. It's a clear before and after. Also, it is characterized by not going away anymore. It's like once you see, you cannot unsee it anymore. You can't walk back that enlightenment. So that's a good characteristic of that paradigm shift, that breakthrough. But that's one side of it. That can be instantaneous. Of course, that might be preceded by a long period of effort and seeking. And then it happens instantaneously, possibly, in many cases. But on the other side, the manifestation of these ethics, living that life, that is a long process. It has started before the breakthrough, before the enlightenment, before the awakening, and it continues through that awakening on the other side of awakening also. So the one does not transform from being this troublesome, quirky character into a perfected sage immediately after that breakthrough. It doesn't happen. I use the Hindi words, it's interesting, the word Buddha. The Buddha is for the enlightened being. And the Hindi word Buddhu means a fool. So the Buddhu doesn't become a Buddha instantaneously. The enlightenment may happen instantaneously, but to manifest that will still take time. Now, you use the word that the quality of awareness, does it change over time? So we will make a distinction here between awareness, consciousness, the ultimate reality, that Atman itself, which doesn't change, which has always been perfect, and which is beyond change and changelessness, basically. You realize you have always been that. What changes is the mind and the personality. Personality is mind and memory and behavior patterns and thoughts in the mind. So those things change over time. They are changing right now. Whoever you are, whatever you are doing, over time we're slowly changing and hopefully evolving. And after enlightenment, we expect the change to be very, very fast and rapid, but it has to happen. And that still does take time. What does it depend on? So I'm relying on, none of these are my ideas. I'm relying on something written 700 years ago. it says here that those who have strenuously practiced spiritual disciplines, uh, uh, strictly principled, ethical, value-centered life, one, practice of meditation to control the mind, practice of altruistic action or karma yoga. So all these things, if a spiritual seeker, the kind of things that spiritual seekers do. So if you have done them for a long period of time, sincerely worked hard at it, a good deal of the work is done. So the enlightenment you get will be manifested easily. If one has not done that, then what will happen is still, in some rare cases, actually an enlightenment event, let us call it. There are technical words for this, brahmakara vritti. It may happen. But after it happens, the spiritual seeker, and that's what this book calls, you're still a spiritual seeker. You have to get down to work. You have to work hard at it so that what you have now realized, what you now clearly know to be the truth, you have this great responsibility to manifest it in your life at least. We must now live up to what we see to be the truth. All right. Can I give an example which I like very much?
Sure.
I heard this from a Swami long ago in the foothills of the Himalayas. It answers this question about what happens after enlightenment. What should one do? If one finds honestly that, yes, I have had this breakthrough, I clearly see this to be the truth, but I also am honest enough to admit my thoughts, my personal life is still not entirely up to the level of the saints. So then what do I do? This Swami said, a devotee had come up to him and was saying that he just had a kidney transplant operation. And the Swami, who did not know much about modern medicine, he asked him how he was doing. And this gentleman said he was under strict, like a diet and medicines and all after. And the Swami was surprised. He said, but you have got the new organ, right? It's been placed in your body. So why do you have to follow these rules so strictly? Then the gentleman told the Swami, the doctor has said to me that if I'm not careful, if I don't follow these rules about food, if I don't take the medicines as prescribed, then three things will happen. First, my body will not accept the new organ as its own. Second, the benefits I expected from this organ, the new kidney, will not flow, will not come. Third, this new kidney will die. After some time, it will be rejected by the body. Then the Swami was very excited by hearing this, and he looked around at us, the monks and all, and he said, oh monks, this is exactly it. If at one point in your study of Vedanta, you feel you have got it, this knowledge is clear to you, then you must double down on your spiritual practices. You must work even harder. Otherwise, these three things will happen. First, this new insight and knowledge will remain disconnected from the rest of your mind and personality. There's this new shining sun of a fantastic new insight, but the rest of the mind and the personality, they seem to be, they belong to that old person. Second, the benefit you expected from it, the peace, the strength, the serenity, they won't come. You will still be affected by the ups and downs of life, and you will still react to them like that old person. Third, he says, this knowledge will, the new insight will die after some time. Now, again, it may not actually die. It may just become dormant because we are not living. The psychoanalyst Erich Fromm said, insight separated from practice remains ineffective. So you have an insight, but you don't do anything about it. Then it becomes ineffective in your life. So he used this example of a kidney transplant to talk about what you should actually do if you feel you have made a genuine breakthrough. Live it.
Thank you so much for clarifying that, Swami, especially because in the modern way of speaking about self-realization, this part gets really ignored about the manifestation side of it. And there is a lot of kind of like a bit of misleading information about it, that it gets dismissed, that it's not necessary. And in a way, it's kind of like evading, because you are kind of falsely convincing yourself that everything is perfect when it's not. Because it's just a realization. There's still a lot of work to be done to manifest that awareness.
Yes, you're right. I'm not downplaying the realization itself, because that's central. That's very important. That's what we've been looking for. And that by itself will give a lot of peace and a lot of inner relief once you see through to that. But then it's good. One Swami put it this way: take it up as a project to manifest that realization in your life. If I am the immortal Brahman, why should I be afraid of death? Instead of being, I'm terrified of that. Oh, the terror, but the terror is also a delusion. It does not matter. Let me be terrified. No, that doesn't work too well. Why be terrified at all? At the level of the mind, there's a terror at the level of the mind of death, of disease, of failure. Deal with it. Use that enlightenment. Use the and manifest it to drive away the terrors in the mind. I'm behaving selfishly. Why should I behave selfishly? See, one part of the mind recognizes that my reality is unlimited being. How can an unlimited being be selfish? So there's this internal contradiction. Why allow internal contradictions to remain and say that they are delusions? Work at it. Take it up as a project and sweep away these contradictions.
And drawing on the same line of that development of awareness, another awareness related question I had was, does the wakefulness state across all these different states of consciousness, about waking, dreaming, and sleeping, do you think that wakefulness across these different states, it increases as one progresses on this path? Does the distinction between these states starts dropping, where dream states is kind of like identical to waking state?
Yes, one must be careful here. There are a lot of subtle matters involved here. First of all, let me say, from the Advaita perspective, enlightenment would be to realize that I am the ever awake consciousness. Awareness or consciousness is ever awake. It's like saying that after enlightenment, suppose the sun. So does it become brighter and brighter? No, the sun was always enormously bright and blazing. It's just that we didn't see it. When we see it, it's not that the sun has now suddenly become bright. It just seems that way to us because we were not looking at it so long. We had our hands over our eyes. Now we take it away and see, oh, the sun has suddenly become bright. No, I am that ever bright, ever awake consciousness. There is no waking, dreaming, deep sleep in consciousness. You can call it ever awake, or you can say it's beyond waking, dreaming, deep sleep. Since I am that, do I become more and more awake? No, nothing of that sort. I realize I was always fully awake. Consciousness is ever awake in the waking state. Consciousness is ever awake in the dream state. Consciousness is ever awake in the deep sleep state. You are that ever awake consciousness. So you are always awake in the waking, in the dream state, and in the deep sleep, the real you. The person is said to be awake and drowsy and falling asleep and dreaming and in deep sleep and waking up again. So that's the mind. It goes through these phases. The moon. So there's a full moon and the quarter and the phases of the moon, the new moon, and then there's, at one time there will be no moon in the sky. You don't see that at all. Now the moon goes through these phases, bright, less bright, and fading away, and then coming back again. Does the sun go through those phases? No. The sun is ever blazing forth. And note that the moonlight and the sun are not two different things. The sunlight alone is reflected from the moon, and it gives rise to these different phases of the moon. So the awareness which we feel in the mind is nothing but your own unlimited awareness, but reflected through, or limited, channeled through the mind. So all these questions about, am I awake? Am I sleepy? Is awareness dormant? It's all mind-based. So these questions are easily resolved when the Advaitic principle is grasped, that I am the unchanging consciousness. Okay, so this is one side of the other side of it is, as I said, this is a subtle and complicated matter. Spiritual practitioners, because of prolonged meditative practices, prolonged dwelling on their awareness nature, that I am the Atman, the nature of their sleep also changes. That is also true. But that's a consequence. That's something that happens in the mind over a period of time. I have heard it said that yogis who have deep meditation at the level of samadhi, they need less and less deep sleep. So again, this I've heard it. I'm not speaking from my personal experience. So those who do that, Swami Brahmananda, a senior monk of our order, disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, used to say 4 hours of sleep are more than enough. And they would go by with less than that. But did they suffer from sleep deprivation? No, they said that meditation, deep meditation, the level of samadhi actually makes up for all of that. And that's an effect of yogic practices. So these two perspectives are involved, a Vedantic jnana perspective, knowledge perspective, and the yogic meditation perspective.
So it's not, but what if like it's naturally the light of awareness is shed on whatever the objects are in the dream state as well as in the waking state. Like for example, before, like mind would block those kind of things because of its own layers of like kind of like it doesn't want to see certain things, but now there is like more room to see some of those things in waking state as well as dream state. So it could be like a byproduct of that, because maybe the contents of minds are emptied enough to let those things show up if they need to show up.
Yes, it might. But here I will tell you one thing. If you approach an Advaita teacher and say, do we see special things in dreams? Or, you know, or do we experience new things? The Advaita teacher would say, I'm not interested. The Advaita is not interested in what you see. Advaita is interested in the seer. What is happening in your life? What are the contents of your thoughts and dreams? Advaita is not interested. But Advaita is interested in you. Who is the one? What is that entity which is dreaming, waking, and experiencing deep sleep? That is the interesting one. Every other science, every other philosophy is interested in the object, is interested in the contents of our experience. Advaita is interested in the subject. Advaita is interested in that which illumines the contents of our experience.
From Advaita perspective, in that case, what is the difference between self-realization and quad-realization? Are those different things, or is it the same?
It's the same thing. That would be a straight answer. But let me complicate that straight answer. So in Advaitic perspective, what is self and what is God? Let's start off from our basic understanding of what is self and God. Sort of something that we generally share. Self is this conscious, sentient being. I have a mind and a body, a personal history, and I have a name, Sarvapriyananda. This is the self as I know it. This is called a jiva, sentient being in Advaita, and just about every other Indian philosophy. And we inhabit an objective universe. What we see in our waking states, this physical universe, which seems to be clearly outside the jiva. I'm here, and somehow I'm limited to the limits of my body, not outside this body. Outside this body is other. Some are living beings, some are things. And the idea is that behind this, beyond this, supporting this entire vast objective universe is a power. We call it God. That is the God of religion, the God who manufactures, creates this physical universe, sustains it, and in the Hindu thought, destroys it and creates again. It's a cyclical thing, quite like our own waking, dreaming, deep sleep. Waking is like, dreaming is like the beginning of creation, and then waking is like the full creation of the universe, and deep sleep is like again the reabsorption, destruction of the universe, and waking up again is like the creation of the universe again. In Sanskrit, Srishti, Sthiti, Pralaya, creation, preservation, and destruction. This goes in a cycle, and that's the characteristic of this supreme soul, God, Ishvara, Bhagavan, whatever you call it. Now, this is the basic idea, and this is something common to all dualistic, theistic religions. What Advaita does is it accepts it provisionally. It calls it the relative level of reality, a transactional level of reality. World, you, God. Now, Advaita says there is an underlying deeper level, ultimate reality, where these distinctions are not there anymore. You and God are one reality, in the sense that you are not this individual being anymore, and God is not the cosmic creator of the universe anymore. There is a deeper reality. It's like, one example would be a wave and the ocean. A wave in the ocean is a tiny thing. It's entirely dependent on the ocean. The ocean is much vaster, much more powerful than the wave, much longer lasting than the wave. Wave comes up in the ocean and disappears back into the ocean. So the wave is like individual being, and the ocean is like God. But what is Advaita talking about? Advaita says, fundamental to the wave, fundamental to the ocean, there is a greater, deeper, more profound reality. That's water. It is water alone which is appearing as the ocean. It is water alone which is appearing as the wave. Water is a fundamental reality, not ocean and wave. Why are we saying that? Because the water can exist without being an ocean or a wave. It can be water vapor in the sky. It can be the water in your glass of water. It can be water in a bottle. But the wave or the ocean cannot exist without the water. They are entirely dependent on the water for its existence. Similarly, universe, individual, God, they all depend upon this absolute reality, which is pure consciousness or existence, consciousness, bliss, Satchidananda. It's expressed in different ways. Sometimes simply as that. So now to answer your question again, as I said, God realization and self-realization in Advaita Vedanta is one and the same thing. Now we realize why. What is self-realization? I am that absolute reality. I am Brahman. What is God? God is that Brahman. So I and God are the same reality, Brahman, absolute existence or absolute consciousness. This is enlightenment in Advaita Vedanta. Here it neatly brings together two kinds of spiritual approaches. One is the God-centered approach. One is the self-inquiry based approach. Notice, here in the United States, for example, religion is basically faith, God-oriented, because it's a predominantly Christian country. But in India, we know that religion can be of different types. There can be religion without God. So Buddhism, for example, is a religion without God. Jainism in India is a religion without God. In the Hindu traditions, Sankhya is a philosophical tradition without God. So you can have a self-inquiry based approach. Buddhism, Jainism, Sankhya, they're all self-inquiry based approach. Notice I'm carefully leaving Advaita out. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, in Hinduism, there's Shaivism, Shaktaism, these are Vaishnavism, they're all God-centered approaches. What Advaita Vedanta does is that what the self-inquiry based approach leads you to and the devotional God-centered approach leads you to is ultimately the same reality. That Advaita expresses in a single sentence, that thou art, you are that, tat tvamasi. Tat, ultimate reality, or you can say God, you, the individual being. You and God are the same reality, but how can the ocean and the wave be the same thing? They are both water. One thing about the ocean, wave, water example, immediately it can be misunderstood because, our mind works that way. No example is perfect. So the ocean has lots of water and the wave has a little bit of water. So when I say The wave is also water. The ocean is also water. Our mind thinks, what he means is, I am this little wave, and I have a little bit of that ultimate truth in me, like water. I am Brahman, but a little bit of Brahman. And God has a lot of Brahman or absolute truth in God. No, there is no little bit, or there is not, there's no whole or part relationship in Advaita Vedanta. That's where the example breaks down. You are Brahman. There's no whole or part of it. You are all of it. If you're going to say that, the entire infinity, all of it is you. You are that infinite reality, and that infinite reality is you. In this sense, God realization and self-realization are the same in Advaita Vedanta.
And in self-inquiry method, one doesn't need the concept of God for self.
Yes, you would be surprised to know how often this question comes up to me. Yesterday itself, somebody asked, so do I really need to believe in God for being a non-dualist and Advaitin? I'm sorry for giving complicated answers, but these things are subtle and they have developed over centuries. So many subtleties are there in that. So the answer will be, do I need to believe in God? Does self-inquiry method need God? Straight answer, no. But qualified answer, yes and no. Straight answer, no. All you need is to investigate into your own experience, your experience of life, by which I mean your waking, dreaming, deep sleep, your experience of being the seer and experiencing a scene, the seer and the scene, or the 5 layers of your being, physical, vital, mental, and intellectual, and so on. You investigate what is already available to you with the help of the Advaitic texts, and you will come to enlightenment. That is there. God doesn't enter into the equation. However, to problematize that, if you actually look at the tradition of Advaita Vedanta, the way it has developed over the last, certainly from Shankaracharya's time onwards, 1200, 1300 years ago, go back to the Gita and the Upanishads, I don't know how much, 2, 3, 4,000, 5,000 years. God has always been there. So in traditional Advaita Vedanta, God is not left out. So they talk about the ultimate reality being the absolute Nirguna Brahman, and God, which is Saguna Brahman, Brahman with attributes. They talk about the Brahman which is to be known. That means you become enlightened. I am Brahman. That is the knowledge. That's enlightening knowledge. But the Brahman which is to be worshipped, in Sanskrit, Genya Brahma, Upasya Brahma. The Brahman about which you are supposed to be enlightened, I am Brahman, and the Brahman which you are supposed to worship. The path to enlightenment is a path of knowledge, of inquiry. You can do self-inquiry and get that. The worship, of course, demands faith. But there also, Advaita Vedanta is very liberal. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to worship Vishnu only, or Shiva only, or the Divine Mother only. If you can always extend it to a Christian conception of God, or an Islamic or a Jewish conception of God. As long as God is that the omniscient, omnipotent power behind this universe, responsible for this manifestation of the universe, fine. It is the same Brahman with certain attributes. And there are very practical necessities, practical uses of devotion to God, which are very helpful. After all, are you interested in self-inquiry, or are you interested in becoming enlightened? And so we'll say, we want to become enlightened. So you should not have hang-ups about, I want only this method to enlightenment. So then are we attached to the method, or are we attached to, or do we want the goal? If you're interested in the goal, I want to become enlightened, Sri Ramakrishna was enormously practical about these things. He said, in whatsoever way, following whatsoever philosophy, you get to enlightenment the fastest, do it as soon as possible. It's an urgent task. So if worshipping God, even having a little faith in God is helpful, why not? If you cannot, on principle, you don't like all that God talk, and it is somehow distasteful to you, luckily in Advaita Vedanta, you can actually leave it out.
This question, next question for you, Swami, I think it more addresses the practical aspects of consciousness, like, because I would love to know like what Advaita Vedanta has to say about the potential of consciousness. Like the reason I'm asking about the potential is because if we don't take into account the practical applications of this knowledge of consciousness, sometimes like these type of topics, they get processed as though like it's just word salad and there's no practical application to any of these topics. That's why I would love to know if Advaita addresses some of that and talks about the potential of consciousness.
Absolutely, it does. First of all, when you go to the potential of consciousness, if you're talking about Atman, Brahman, pure consciousness, the absolute reality which Advaita talks about what you are, notice it is the most practical thing in our lives. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, loving, hating, desiring. So all of these are things that we do all our lives. We fill our waking and even dream lives with these things. How are these possible? What makes all of this possible? Only consciousness. Only you, being a conscious entity, can actually have the experience, the first person experience of thinking, being happy, being sad, of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. As a computer science person, that nowadays AI powered robots, for example, they can do almost everything that we do. They can drive a car. In California, I think you have these self-driving cars. So they can do things, they can see, they can hear, they can take decisions, and yet they can't. Externally, the behavior is the same as us. So you are driving a car and a self-driving car pulls up next to you. To a person observing from outside, both the cars are behaving in the same way. The decisions that Suma takes, that robot in the self-driving car, the AI there, takes the similar decisions. And yet there's a huge difference internally. Within you, when you are driving a car, you have the sensations of sound, of sight, of quick decision making, the feel of the wheel in your hands, the movement of the car, all of it you're feeling. It's a vivid first person movie, multicolored, multidimensional movies going on. That is because of consciousness. The robot does not have that. It's entirely a machine. Somebody said, how do you know? I said, ask computer engineers. Have they programmed it for consciousness? They know what kind of software they have put in there, what kind of programming. None of it is for becoming self-conscious. So they will not claim that we have made our robot self-conscious. So consciousness is, first of all, is the most practical thing in our lives. Without that, we don't have a life. It doesn't have to be a spiritual life, any kind of life. The most materialistic life also, impossible without consciousness. Christoph Koch, the chief scientist of the Paul Allen Brain Institute, he said in a book talk 1.5 years back at Harvard Bookstore that consciousness is clearly the most important thing in our lives. In what sense? He said, if you give me $1 billion and say that you will not be conscious anymore, will I accept it? No. It's meaningless. What is the point of being a billionaire if I have no awareness of anything at all? So consciousness is the first and primary thing. Things are practical only because you're conscious. Things are impractical and practical. The whole distinction is there because you are conscious. Now, what does Advaita bring to the table? We are conscious, no doubt about it. But what do we do about this? We don't pay any attention to being conscious. Rather, we use it and make ourselves miserable. We have a whole host of desires which we are trying to fulfill, and we fulfill some of it and we're dissatisfied. We are unable to fulfill many things and we become frustrated and live lives of quiet desperation. Advaita says the core issue here is ignorance of our real nature. What is this real nature? It's the real nature of consciousness. So we have imposed or superimposed the characteristics of the body and the mind on ourselves. Body is born. I am born, we think. The body ages. I am getting older. The body is sick. I am sick. Body dies or is going to die. Oh my God, I'm going to die. And yet it's all the body. And it's something that we never question. So Advaita questions that. What happens to the body? Is it what's happening to you? What happens in a movie? Is that what happens to the screen? If there's an earthquake in the movie, does the screen get cracked? If there's an inferno in a movie, does the screen get burnt? Movie screen. It's a flood in the movie, a deluge. Does the movie screen get even wet, even a little bit? No, it doesn't. Similarly, we discover in Advaita Vedanta that consciousness is not actually affected by the vicissitudes of what happens into the body or even the mind. You, in that sense, are entirely safe from the ups and downs of life, from what happens to the body, from what happens to the mind. In fact, once we realize this realization is also in the mind calms down. The mind gets this quality of serenity and peace. And that also has its effect on the body. So there's this tremendous impact of realizing the true nature of consciousness. Consciousness is already enormously practical in our lives because you're using it all the time. Without that, you wouldn't have a life. But when we realize the true nature of the consciousness which we are, then many of the problems at the deepest level, fear, anxiety, lack of fulfillment, selfishness, hatred of others, dislike of others, all of these are cleared up. We realized they were based on a delusion, limiting consciousness to this body-mind identity. That goes away. So this is an enormous benefit. I remember I asked a Swami, a teacher long ago, I was a novice, this was more than 20 years ago, what is the use of Advaita? Practical use. I was influenced by the American philosophy of pragmatism, cash value. What does it do for you? So his answer was twofold. First of all, why should it have any use? The truth is good for its own sake. If this is the truth that we are consciousness and we are not just body-mind, then it's good to know that because it's the truth. Having said that, it has enormous use. After all, what is use? What is utility? Pure economic definition of utility, that which increases satisfaction, that which gives you happiness. This gives you unlimited happiness and helps you to overcome the greatest of sorrows. I'm quoting the Bhagavad Gita here. Having attained which nothing greater remains to be attained, being centered in which the greatest of sorrows cannot shake you. Which means as long as you are living in this body-mind, sorrows will keep coming because of the past karma of this body-mind. It will keep generating new ups and downs in life. If you realize the true nature of consciousness, of what you are, then in those ups and downs, you will be unconcerned. But if you don't realize that, if you think we are just this little creature, we'll be terrified. We'll have this mortal fear of life itself and death itself. So it has the greatest practical use. I could go on. All our ethics ultimately is based on this oneness of all existence. Why should I be good? Why should I not harm my neighbor? Why love thy neighbor? Why not harm my neighbor if it suits my purpose? Because your neighbor is yourself. Once you realize the oneness of all existence, we begin to see that we are all one reality. So if I hurt you, if I behave as if by pulling resources, money, food, praise, achievement, credit to myself, I'll be happier at your expense, it won't work. Advaita explains why it won't work. Because you are actually acting against yourself, against your own higher self. Here in the United Nations, if you go to the third floor, United Nations headquarters here, it's written in big letters, a common principle found in all religions of the world. This is called the Golden Rule. The Golden Rule is basically, it's been stated in different ways in every religious tradition across the centuries, millennia, in every part of the world. It basically states that you should treat others as you would have them treat you. Common sense says the way others treat you, you treat them equally. So if they treat you badly, you also give back in good measure and treat them badly. Treat them, if they treat you well, you treat them well. No, this principle says you treat them the way you want them to treat you. We want to be treated well by others. So we should, regardless of how others are behaving, we should treat others well, because we want them to treat us like that. Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says to Arjuna in the 6th chapter, that yogi is the highest, greatest yogi, who sees the same divinity in all beings, the same consciousness in all beings, and treats their sorrows and happinesses as one's own. Just as if someone praises me, if someone gives me good food, makes me comfortable, takes care of me when I'm sick, I am happy. I feel that happiness. So also others will feel the same kind of happiness when I take care of them when they're ill, when I speak gently and nicely to them, when I treat them to good food and give them comfort. So their happiness and my happiness are the same and of equal value. I will, as I work to generate happiness in this body mind, I will work to generate happiness in others' body minds. I will work to remove their sorrows. As my sorrows and pains are painful for me, similarly, the same sorrows and pains are painful equally for all those other beings. As I work to remove the pains in this one body mind, I should work in the same way to remove the pains in all those body minds. This sameness, it comes out of Advaita, the vision of the one divinity, one consciousness in all beings.
That was a brilliant answer, Swami. Thank you for explaining it so clearly. Because sometimes I feel like sometimes it's important to point to the practical aspects of this subject, especially in the mainstream world. It becomes easier to talk about these topics then.
Yes.
And thank you so much for this talk today. I feel like it was concise, and at least for me, it was very insightful. And in our personal email interaction, I feel like you walked the talk. So you have been a good role model for me in that sense, where it's nice to see someone like who is not only just a brilliant speaker, but is also walking the talk. So thank you for being that role model.
Thank you. Thank you. We are all trying in our own little way, but that's good. Let's just keep walking the path. And Vivekananda's definition is so powerful, as I mentioned, the manifestation of the divinity already within us. I think that's a definition which can guide us throughout our lives. Am I manifesting that divinity already within me? And that's good.
And if people want to find out more about you, Vedanta, ny.org.
Yes, and the Vedanta NY channel on YouTube, most of our talks, not just mine, but other Swamis, other scholars who come and give talks in New York in our Vedanta Society, those we upload, we record them and upload them on the channel, on YouTube.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Suma, and do carry this on. You have already you've had some wonderful interviews on your channel, which I was listening to the one with Rupert Spira, and I'll look forward to listening to the other ones too.
Thank you.